Hello, Leo. Welcome back, my beautiful lions. As I sit with your energy today, I keep feeling this sense of movement. Not loud movement, not dramatic movement. More like something that has been sitting still for a very long time, finally beginning to stir. It's almost as if someone who spent months, maybe even years, convincing themselves to stay where they were, can no longer ignore what their heart keeps bringing back to their attention. And somehow, Leo, that attention keeps finding its way back to you. The chariot appears almost immediately, and the feeling surrounding it is interesting. This doesn't feel like someone who suddenly woke up one morning and changed their mind. No, this feels like someone who has been quietly wrestling with themselves behind the scenes. You may not have seen it. You may not even know it's happening. But there seems to be a growing tension inside this person between staying comfortable and finally moving toward what feels important. What catches my attention is that they don't seem as distracted as they once were. For a long time, there may have been uncertainty surrounding this connection. Questions, assumptions, fears, stories they told themselves when they didn't know what to do with their feelings. But something feels different now. The Ace of Swords arrives like a sudden moment of honesty, not necessarily a conversation. Not yet. More like the kind of realization that happens when you're alone at night and you suddenly stop arguing with yourself. You stop searching for excuses. You stop pretending you don't care. You stop trying to explain away something that keeps returning to your heart. And Leo, I feel like this person is reaching that place. The more I sit with their energy, the more I feel someone looking back at the past with a completely different perspective than before. Sometimes clarity doesn't arrive because new information appears. Sometimes clarity arrives because we're finally willing to see what was there all along. And that's exactly what this feels like. Justice shows up here with a very calm energy. Not punishment, not blame, not regret, just honesty. A willingness to look at things fairly. A willingness to admit that maybe they didn't fully understand what this connection meant when it first appeared. Maybe they underestimated your importance. Maybe they assumed there would always be more time. Maybe they believed they could keep their distance without it affecting them. Yet life has a strange way of revealing what matters after enough silence has passed. The longer they remain apart from what their heart wants, the harder it becomes to ignore. And that's where the King of Wands begins to step forward. I love this energy because it feels different from hesitation, different from confusion, different from waiting. This feels like someone slowly reconnecting with their confidence. Not confidence built on ego, confidence built on truth. The kind that develops when a person finally becomes tired of hiding from themselves. You know, Leo, I almost see this person replaying moments involving you. Conversations, memories, small details that seemed ordinary at the time, but now carry a different weight. And every time they revisit those memories, something becomes clearer. You mattered more than they admitted. You touched their life more deeply than they expected. You left an impression that never really disappeared. Yeah, that's the feeling. Something that never completely left. What makes this energy fascinating is that I don't feel urgency yet. I feel preparation. Like someone standing at the edge of a road, looking toward a destination they have been avoiding for far too long. The road is still there. The feelings are still there. And the excuses are becoming harder to believe. There is still more happening beneath the surface than what is visible right now. More reflection, more realization, more pieces quietly falling into place. Because the story doesn't stop with someone recognizing their feelings. The deeper transformation seems to begin after that realization arrives. And that's exactly where the next chapter wants to take us. There is something fascinating about what happens when life becomes quieter. Not empty, not lonely, just quiet enough that all the distractions lose their grip. The Hermit keeps appearing in this energy, and every time I look at this card, I see someone sitting alone with thoughts they can no longer outrun. You know those moments when the world finally stops talking and all that's left is your own voice? That's the feeling surrounding this person. For a while, they may have filled their days with responsibilities, plans, routines, or even other people. Not because those things brought real fulfillment, but because staying busy can sometimes be easier than asking difficult questions. Questions like, what am I really looking for? What actually makes me happy? Why do certain memories refuse to leave me alone? Those questions seem to have become louder recently, and strangely enough, many of the answers seem to lead back toward you. Not because you're occupying every thought they have, not because they've become obsessed. It feels deeper than that, more personal, more reflective, almost like your presence in their life became a mirror without either of you realizing it. The Ace of Wands carries a very different feeling here than passion alone. It feels like inspiration. A spark that arrives after a long season of emotional exhaustion. The kind of spark that makes someone wake up one morning and realize they don't want to keep living the same story anymore. Yeah, that kind of spark. I keep sensing this person looking around at different parts of their life and asking themselves whether those things truly matter. Not what sounds impressive, not what looks successful, not what other people approve of, what actually matters. And sometimes that question changes everything. Because once a person begins searching for authenticity, many old beliefs start falling away on their own. The fear of appearing vulnerable, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of making mistakes, the fear of opening their heart. Some of those fears seem smaller now than they once did. Not gone, just losing power. Temperance enters the reading, almost like a gentle hand resting on someone's shoulder. Nothing feels rushed. Nothing feels forced. There is a softness here that wasn't present before. A willingness to stop fighting every emotion that surfaces. A willingness to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. Oh my God, that can be one of the hardest lessons in life. Learning that not every uncomfortable feeling needs to be escaped. Sometimes it only needs to be understood. This person appears to be learning exactly that. The more they understand themselves, the less they seem interested in old patterns, old reactions, old defenses, old versions of who they thought they needed to be. And I think that realization has surprised them. Because growth rarely looks dramatic while it's happening. Most of the time, it looks like quiet evenings, long walks, unanswered questions, unexpected tears, moments of honesty that happen when nobody else is watching. That's where this energy feels strongest. The world appears near the end of this chapter. And there is something peaceful about it, not a final ending, more like someone standing at the edge of a completed lesson, looking back, recognizing how much has changed, realizing they are no longer carrying certain fears that once controlled their decisions. I keep hearing the phrase, "I see things differently now," not spoken out loud, felt internally, almost like a private confession. And Leo, what feels interesting is that your role in this story may have been much larger than you realize, not through anything you intentionally did, not because you tried to teach them. Sometimes people change because they encounter someone who quietly shows them another way of being. Someone who remains authentic. Someone who remains warm. Someone who remains true to themselves even when circumstances become complicated. That kind of presence can leave a lasting impression. Long after conversations end. Long after distance appears. Long after life moves in different directions. A new understanding seems to be emerging from everything they've experienced. And as those pieces continue settling into place, another layer of emotion begins rising toward the surface, one that feels much harder to ignore than before. Some memories have a strange way of waiting patiently in the background. They don't demand attention, they don't arrive with noise, they simply sit somewhere deep inside the heart until an ordinary moment brings them back to life. That's the feeling surrounding this energy. The Six of Cups appears, and suddenly everything feels softer. Not easier, just softer. I keep seeing this person encountering little reminders throughout their day. A song they weren't expecting to hear. A familiar phrase. A place they haven't thought about in a long time. Something simple that pulls them back into a memory before they even realize what's happening. And when those memories arrive, they don't feel distant, they feel surprisingly alive. Almost as if part of them never really left those moments behind. What stands out is that they aren't only remembering major events, they're remembering details. The way you laughed at something completely ridiculous. The way a conversation seemed to flow effortlessly. The feeling of being understood without needing to explain every thought. Those are the kinds of memories that seem to linger. The ones that don't appear important until they're gone. The Five of Pentacles carries an ache here that feels difficult to ignore. Not dramatic heartbreak, not overwhelming grief. More like the quiet realization that something meaningful is missing. You know that feeling when a room looks exactly the same as it always has, yet somehow feels different because one person is no longer there? That's what this reminds me of. Life continues, responsibilities continue, days continue, but something feels absent, and the longer that absence remains, the harder it becomes to pretend it doesn't matter. Yeah, this person seems to be reaching that point. I don't get the feeling that they're constantly sitting around thinking about you every second of the day. Life is still happening. They're still dealing with their own responsibilities and personal journey, but your presence appears in unexpected places, and every time it does, it leaves them with more questions than answers, because there is a growing awareness that not everyone creates the same emotional impact. Not every connection leaves an imprint that survives distance. Not every person becomes part of your internal world. Leo seems to occupy a space that other people haven't been able to reach, and I think that realization has surprised them more than they expected. The Five of Cups brings another layer into the story. This one feels deeply personal, not because of what happened, but because of what didn't happen. Words left unsaid, conversations postponed, moments that passed too quickly, feelings that stayed hidden behind pride, uncertainty, or fear. Oh my God. There is something about untold stories that can stay with a person for years, not because they know what would have happened, because they don't. It's the mystery that remains, the wondering, the imagining, the possibility. I keep hearing someone replaying old situations in their mind and quietly asking themselves, what if I had been more honest? Not to punish themselves, not to live in regret, just because they're trying to understand their own choices from a different perspective. There is compassion growing here. Compassion for themselves, compassion for the past, compassion for the version of them that wasn't ready to see certain things yet. And through all of this reflection, the Ten of Cups begins to emerge. I find this interesting because it doesn't feel connected to fantasy. It feels connected to emotional truth. This person seems to be questioning what happiness actually means, not the version presented by other people, not the version social media tries to sell. Their own version, the version that feels real, the version that brings peace rather than performance. And somehow, whenever they picture that feeling, your energy keeps appearing nearby. Not as a perfect solution, not as an answer to every problem, simply as someone whose presence feels meaningful, someone whose absence taught them something they didn't fully understand before. There is a tenderness surrounding this realization, a growing awareness that some connections become more valuable with time rather than less. And while many of these thoughts remain unspoken for now, they seem to be gathering weight inside this person's heart. Because remembering someone is one thing, recognizing that you may want them back in your life is something else entirely. A quiet decision seems to be taking shape beneath the surface. Not the kind of decision announced to the world. Not the kind that arrives with grand declarations. More like the moment someone stops asking themselves whether they should reach out and begins wondering how. The Knight of Cups carries that feeling beautifully. I keep seeing someone rehearsing conversations in their mind, not because they're trying to be perfect, because they care about what happens next. Words suddenly feel important. Timing feels important. Even small details feel important. There is an awareness here that some opportunities deserve more care than others. And somehow, you seem to fall into that category. What strikes me is that this energy feels softer than pursuit and stronger than curiosity. It's somewhere in between. A growing desire to bridge a distance that no longer feels comfortable. A desire to close a gap that has existed for longer than they expected. You know how people sometimes convince themselves they need more time, more clarity, more certainty, more preparation. Yet eventually there comes a moment when waiting starts feeling heavier than moving. That seems to be where this person is standing. The Ace of Pentacles appears and immediately changes the atmosphere. The focus shifts away from imagination and toward reality, toward something tangible, something that can actually exist in the physical world. I don't get the feeling that they simply want emotional reassurance anymore. There is a practical side emerging. A mature side, a side that is beginning to ask, what could I actually build here? That's a very different question from, how do I feel? Because feelings can live quietly in the heart for years. Building something requires participation, effort, presence, consistency. And those themes seem to be becoming more important to this person. I almost see them evaluating their own life through a different lens, looking at habits, choices, patterns, asking themselves whether they are capable of offering something meaningful rather than simply talking about it. Yeah, that feels significant. There is a quiet wish to be seen differently, not through explanations, not through promises, through actions, through growth, through showing rather than telling. The Three of Pentacles reinforces that feeling. This isn't the energy of someone chasing a fantasy. It's the energy of someone considering what kind of foundation could support a future connection. And I think that's why there is so much reflection happening behind the scenes. Because they don't want to approach things the same way they once did. They want their actions to match the feelings they have been carrying. The Three of Cups adds a completely different layer. For a moment, everything becomes lighter. I keep seeing laughter, conversation, shared space. The simple joy of being around someone whose company feels easy. There is something beautiful about that, because it reminds me that not every meaningful connection is built only through intense emotions. Sometimes it grows through friendship, comfort, familiarity, moments that allow two people to simply enjoy each other's presence. And I think this person misses that, maybe more than they expected, not just the emotional connection. The companionship, the feeling of sharing life with someone who understands their sense of humor, their quirks, their stories. The Two of Cups sits quietly in the middle of all this energy. And when I look at it, I don't hear dramatic declarations. I hear sincerity, the kind that appears when someone stops trying to protect themselves from vulnerability. Because that's really what this seems to be about. A willingness to show up honestly. A willingness to let another person see who they have become. Not because they expect anything in return. Because hiding no longer feels authentic. Oh my God, there is something incredibly human about that. Wanting to be understood. Wanting to reconnect. Wanting to share a piece of your heart without knowing exactly how it will be received. This person appears to be gathering courage for that experience. Little by little, day by day, thought by thought. The movement may still be unfolding quietly for now, but the emotional distance that once felt acceptable no longer seems as comfortable as it used to. And as that realization continues growing, another chapter begins preparing itself in the background, one that carries the energy of endings, transformation, and a very different version of the story waiting just ahead. Some endings arrive like a storm, others arrive so quietly that you only recognize them after they've already passed. The death card feels more like the second kind. I don't see chaos here, I see release. I see someone standing in front of a version of themselves that no longer fits and realizing they can't keep carrying it forward. It's an unusual feeling, part grief, part relief, part curiosity about what life might look like without all the old weight. There are beliefs this person once held on to very tightly. Ideas about love, ideas about vulnerability, ideas about control, ideas about who they needed to be in order to protect themselves. Many of those ideas seem to be losing their place in the story, not because someone forced them to change, because life kept presenting lessons they could no longer ignore. You know, growth rarely asks for permission. It simply arrives and starts rearranging things. And I think that's exactly what happened here. The version of this person who once hesitated, avoided, overcomplicated, or hid behind uncertainty appears to be fading into the background, not disappearing entirely, just making room for someone new. The star shines over this chapter with such a gentle energy. What I love about it is that it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels hopeful. Hope after confusion. Hope after disappointment. Hope after learning difficult truths about yourself. There is a softness in this card that feels deeply earned, like someone who has finally stopped fighting every chapter of their journey and started trusting their own growth. I keep sensing moments when this person surprised themselves recently. Small moments, simple moments. Responding differently than they would have before, seeing situations differently than they once did, allowing themselves to feel emotions they previously avoided. Those changes might seem invisible to everyone else, but internally they matter, because they reveal just how much has shifted beneath the surface. The Fool appears almost like a breath of fresh air, not reckless, not careless, just open. There is a difference. For a long time, this person may have approached life carrying expectations, fears, and protective walls. The energy here feels lighter, not because all the answers have arrived, because they are becoming less afraid of unanswered questions. Oh my God, that can change everything. When fear no longer controls every decision, new possibilities suddenly become visible. And I feel that happening here. A willingness to step into unfamiliar territory. A willingness to approach life with curiosity instead of resistance. A willingness to believe that not every chapter needs to resemble the one before it. The Emperor brings an entirely different tone into the reading. Grounded, stable, intentional. There is something powerful about this card appearing after so much inner transformation. Because growth is one thing. Applying that growth in real life is another. This person seems to be thinking about responsibility, consistency, accountability. Not in a heavy way, in a mature way. Almost like they're asking themselves what kind of person they want to become moving forward. And I think part of that answer involves showing up differently than they once did. Not through words alone, through presence. Through actions, through choices that reflect who they are becoming. The energy of the King of Wands and Queen of Wands feels particularly beautiful here, not because it promises a specific outcome, because it reflects recognition, mutual respect, admiration, a sense of seeing someone clearly. When I look at these cards together, I don't feel perfection. I feel balance. Two individuals who have traveled through their own experiences, learned their own lessons, faced their own challenges, and emerged with a deeper understanding of themselves. What feels most significant is that this person no longer seems focused on who they used to be. Their attention is moving toward who they are becoming. And somewhere within that evolving vision of the future, your presence continues to hold meaning, not as an unfinished chapter, not as a memory trapped in the past, more like a possibility being viewed through entirely different eyes than before. The story feels very different from where it began. The silence carries a different meaning. The emotions carry a different depth. And the road ahead appears open in ways it wasn't before. Whatever unfolds from here seems connected to a version of themselves that is far more honest, far more grounded, and far more willing to meet life with an open heart than the one who first stepped into this journey. Whatever part of this reading resonated with you today, take only what feels right for your journey and leave the rest behind. Sometimes life has a way of changing people quietly, not through one dramatic moment, but through many small realizations that slowly reshape the heart. And maybe that's what this story has been exploring all along. A person learning, a person growing, a person beginning to see things from a perspective they couldn't see before. Whether this energy is unfolding around you right now, or simply offering something to reflect on, I hope this reading brought you a little clarity, a little comfort, and maybe even a little hope. Thank you for allowing me to share this space with you. Leo, you are deeply appreciated, and your energy is always welcome here. That's all I've got for you for this reading. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I truly appreciate it. You all mean a lot to me, and I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, be gentle with yourself, trust your own inner wisdom, and take care. Okay, bye.